In this video, I will show you all of my tips and tricks for how I made this tunnel. Here we are in After Effects, and as you can see, I'm playing back this tunnel sequence from the Illumina explainer video I did. And I'm playing it back here just so we can kind of dissect a little bit the individual elements and kind of like the stages I went through to break this down. And I'm going to walk you through how I created the opening of this tunnel. So before we get too far into that, I just want to show you that everything's going to eventually live in this comp that will be rendered. There's of course not much in here. We have a comp camera and we have our controls with the Z offset. And here we have our element tunnel shape, which I will show you in more detail in the next step. But first, just still dissecting the sequence a bit more in detail. You can see it's opening like a window. Nothing's really stretching. Everything's very geometric. The client has a grid as part of their brand guide, and they're very strict on that. And they really wanted the grid to be a guiding motif throughout the design and both the animation and the video. So I kind of took that. When I hear grid, I think system. I think something that's very rigid, can be flexible at the same time, but it has to align to a grid. And grid is one of the most powerful tools in design. And so when we were bringing it to animation, I knew that we could use code and JavaScript to really drive this. And so as we're kind of going through here, you can see how we're opening up like a window or like a tunnel in a sense. So I was using shape layers because I could use a rectangle, a parametric shape, and with that position property in the shape group itself, I can also use expression on there to drive the like quote unquote anchor point of it. So I can decide, oh, hey, I can show it where to animate this size and have this size move and increase and decrease from like which axis. And I've even made a little tool for it, which I'll show you in a bit. But that was really kind of the thought here. I wanted to create one modular element that could then scale into a bigger system. And we could leverage essential properties and essential graphics to really dial in color. Okay, here we are in our element tunnel shape comp. And this is going to be where we build the space functionality. This is really where the magic is going to happen. I'm going to open up my comp settings real quick just to show you. I'm working in like a square comp at 2500 pixels by 2500 pixels. I just set it to 5 seconds for now. I think I had it at 10 for the final video. And then at 24 frames a second, just so we're all on the same page. All right, so what were the first steps in doing this? Usually when I go into any composition to start, I always create a blank shape layer and I call it controls. And on this controls layer is usually where I have like effects that are controlling everything in the comp, like slider controls, different expression controls like checkboxes or color controls. And this is really helpful just to have up there at a high level so you can quickly adjust things on the fly. And then also I use it as a null sometimes as well, just to parent everything too. And so I'm setting up my controls real quick, and I know I'm going to need one slider control. This is going to be our animation. And let's see, I'm just going to set keyframes real quick to 1 second. And this is going to be from 0 to 1. And we'll dive into more of this a little bit later. And I need 3 color controls. So these color controls, maybe as you saw in the original tunnel, so I'm going to have one solid color. And let's just make this, I don't know, like pink-ish or red something. See, I'm going to call this fill. Then I'm going to have my gradient start. Cool. And this gradient start, let's just pick something kind of complementary, or not complementary, maybe just some similar color family here. Gradient end. And then this is just going to be something a little bit lighter so we can have a little bit of contrast there. Cool. And these are going to make a lot more sense pretty soon. So first of all, I know I need a matte because I'm going to have to continuously rasterize and collapse transformations, this composition in the parent comp. And so really for this matte, I just need it to fill the whole screen. So I'm just going to add a blank shape layer here, hit the square icon, and we have a rectangle now. I'm just going to call this matte. I'm going to turn it off and set it to 3D. And I'm going to duplicate this because I already have my rectangle. So I'm just going to use that. It's a little bit easier. And now I have my TL. So I'm calling this TL because I'm working clockwise. I'm going to have my top left element here, top right, BR, and then BL. And that will just makes it a little bit easier for organization. All right, and then let's just change this layer color to pink. And then I'm going to matte this to the matte before I forget. Cool. So we have this yellow here, and we don't really want that. So here, let me lock this real quick. And I'm going to want this fill to be red. Awesome. So As you remember from the intro, I was talking about how I use the parametric shape and I use the size property and the position property. So starting from the top left, I'm going to want to start here in my top left quadrant. So 0, 0 on the position of the composition. With my position property selected, I made a tool called RecRig, and essentially it helps me to position my quote unquote anchor points once again, but it's really a big shape layer helper. And so I want this to be in the top left. And then in this size, I am going to bring it back real quick and add these sliders right here. All right, now that I have my size property linked up with these expressions, really all that expression did, it just quickly mapped my size property to two separate sliders. So it created these two sliders on my layer. And since I have the anchor point anchored to the top left here, you can see that when I move my sliders, everything is moving appropriately and accurately. So see, to start off, I'm starting from the top left here. I'm going to need to essentially have 4 squares to start off. And so if I remember correctly, let's see, 1250 to start here. And then this is also going to be, I think I had this at 2501, just so we could prevent some aliasing. And so I'm going to need keyframes on my, if I remember correctly, my X slider, and then my Y position. Yes, because I want my X to say is 0. And then I'm going to set another property here for a keyframe. And so actually, no, this Y position is correct. And I'm going to want this to be a minus 1250. So we're starting off with our square. And then my X here is going to be 0. So you might be wondering why I have keyframes back to back right here. So I'm essentially creating a joysticks and sliders type scenario. Joysticks and sliders is a tool usually used for character animation, but in this instance, I am using it for the logic behind it for creating little helpful rigs. And so if I'm just going to take these keyframes out, I can kind of show you, see, we're moving down like this. So this is really the base of our animation. And we're going to be doing some linking so we can control the easing later. But that's really the basic idea. And so now let's link this up with expressions. I'm going to activate the expression on my XI slider. And I want to get the keyframe values of both keyframes in a variable. So I'm going to say const key val 1. That's going to equal this property. So I'm referencing this slider property dot key and then the index, and it's a 1 index. And then I want the value property of that keyframe. And in expressions, you can hit Command D to duplicate that line. And then I want this to be key val 2. And this is going to be 2 as well. Cool. So now that we have these, oh, and most importantly, I need my animation source. And I'll just call this source and let us pick whip to animation. Awesome. So, and from here, the basics of it is we just create a linear expression. And so linear helps you map ranges from one range to another. And so I'm going to use the source animation range, and this is going to drive the animation for everything. So source, and it goes from 0 to 1, if you remember the keyframes we set before. And then I'm going to have this go from key val 1 to key val 2. Whoop. 2. There we go. Great. And so before we move forward, let me just show you. So these keyframes are moving, on the x-axis, just like this. It is shrinking the shape, which is exactly what we want, no stretching. And it's just following the range of the control layer, or that animation property. And we're going back and forth. So now that we have that expression set, I can copy this expression only. And it's because it's property agnostic. So it says this property. So any property I put this on, it's going to work the same way as it did here without having to change all these values inside the code. So I can just paste. And great. So now, as we're animating through here, look at that. It's exactly what we want. That is the base of what we need here. And now I can quickly kind of go through and set up the other ones. All right, so I can set up my TR real quick. TR. And then I'm going to, let me just change this layer color to yellow. And then I do not want this fill, actually. I'm going to add a gradient fill. And I'm going to add a tint effect. Awesome. And just before we get, too crazy into everything, I'm going to map my colors just so, before we get too deep, I'm going to map my tint controls to my color controls up there, and there we go. Okay, so since our anchor point is pretty much the same, all we have to do is kind of change which properties are being animated. So in this instance, my X slider is not animating. It's actually going to stay 2501, like kind of like how we did for the Y for the other one. So I'm just going to cut this property, and then I'm going to paste it on my Y, and then change my X to 2501, and then have my my X property is going to, my X position property is going to be the one that's animating. And so, see, the Y is always going to be 0. It's going to be at the top. And then my X is going to be starting off at 1250 in the middle. Great. And then when it goes to, yep, that's going to go to 0. And then my Y starts at 1250 because that's half of the comp. And then, yep, and that's also going to go to 0. So as we're going through, you can see we're starting to get, it's pretty easy just to make some adjustments. And we're following that same animation. And we're going to fix the color in the next step, but we're kind of getting the base of the animation here first. And so, cool. So let's keep moving. So since the TL is going to be very similar to the BR in style and animation, I'm just going to duplicate that TL, call this BR, and then so this position is actually going to be on the top right over here. So with that position property selected, TR, that's the only thing I need to change. I don't need to use the script again on this layer. So let us set this correctly. So this X is actually going to be here, 2500, awesome. And then, so this Y property is also animating. So I just need to take that minus away, great. And then I believe, is this correct? Do I have this right? Yep. It is, all we have to do is just change a quick value and everything is animating as it needs to. Awesome. And let's see here. I'm going to duplicate this TR for the bottom step. This is going to be called BL. Now I just need to change the position property on this one more time. And if I remember correctly, it's going to be BR. Yep. Cool. So now on this BL shape layer here, let's see, my Y is actually going to be at 2500 because it needs to be at the bottom of the composition. And then its X is starting off at 1250, and then it's actually going towards 2500, towards the end. And then my X size, yep, it's going to say 2501, and my Y property is, my Y size is what's animating. So as we're going through, you can see we have these 4 different shape layers animating. And that's really like the, again, I say it again, the crux of this animation. It's super nifty. Everything's moving. Now we're going to add easing and everything in the very final step, but this is really what we wanted to get down. All right, now let's jump into coloring this real quick. Okay, in the last step, we were focusing on building the animation, building this system, rigging up these shapes so they can animate their size and their position. So now we're going to focus on the color. We're going to focus on this top right one here first. As you can see, there's a gradient on it, and the start and end points are pretty close together, as you can see by that sharp middle point. So we are going to programmatically have these be in the middle and have these at an angle at the same time. So what I mean by that is like, so for this gradient fill, our start point, I want it to be right here. Currently, see both start and end point are up here at the top of the shape layer. I want the start point to be the middle and on the edge, the far left. And then I want my end point to be in the middle of the width. Then I want it to be on the very bottom of the height. So I guess the maximum of the height. And so since we have our anchor point kind of locked in, this is going to be really easy. So first off, let's start with our start point. So activating the expression on here. So const, and then I want my size property. Actually, I'm going to have to call this source size as my variable. And I'm going to select size. Great. Cool. And now this is the easy part. So for my X coordinate, because it goes X and Y, let's see, I'm going to have this be 0, actually. And then I'm going to access my source size Y coordinate. And then, so let's just hit that enter real quick. And so cool, what just happened? So the start point is all the way down here. Ignore the end point for now. We're going to tackle that next. The start point went all the way down to the bottom. So I want it to be in the middle. And so the easy way around that is that we can just divide it by 2 because we're pushing down because Y values go down just like you would do animate Y position. So source size 1 of the Y thing, the Y property divided by 2. Great. So now we have it here. No matter what, no matter where it's going, it's always going to be on that left side of the shape. Great. So now here, let me copy this and expression and paste it to the endpoint. So now they're at the same point. We don't want that, of course. And I can take this source size 1 and I'm actually going to access the x coordinate of it. And then I want this to be divided by 2 because I want this to be in the middle. So we're going to be pushing to the right in the positive. And then I'm going to want this to be the height of my, actually, no, I want this to be 0 as well, actually. I want the y to be 0. So I'm going to have this be pointing up for the endpoint. So we have this little bit of an angle, so that way we're not just limited to like just a regular kind of linear gradient. It's still linear, I guess, but at least we're at an angle, and it's always going to be confined to that, and it looks a bit more dynamic that way. Great, so now we're set there. Love how it's like stretching just like as it needs to. So now I can just actually apply this gradient fill. I'm going to copy. I'm going to go to my BL down here. As you can see, the gradient's all messed up as well. And put it in the shape group. So in here, you can kind of see our gradient handles are way over here. And I want this gradient to be on the far right side. And I'm going to have it angle down, I think, just to kind of contradict or contrast up above. So we already have our 0 size set for our start point. And I'm going to want this in the middle. So we need to go up. So I want this to be negative. Before I do that, here, let me just hit source size 1. Okay, and the reason why it's going so far down is because our anchor point is right here at the bottom right. And so we can just immediately go put a negative in front of source size 1. That's going to go all the way to the top. And now, here, let's just divide that by 2. And boom, we're right here in the middle. You can kind of see, it's a little bright, so it might be a little hard to see it, but it's right here in the middle. And so with that in mind, I'm just going to copy this expression once more. So we're from a similar starting point. And so both of these handles are now in the same coordinate. And I'm going to need a source size. I'm going to access my x property or x coordinate of the size. And I'm going to divide that by a -2 because it's moving left. All right, so now we're in the middle. And now for this y, I'm going to, so that went up. I'm going to have this one go down. Great. So let's see here. Negative source size. Well, actually, no, I'm just going to have this be 0 because that is where we're starting from. And there we go. I can just play this back. And we have this cool little gradient look, like they're kind of going opposite directions and they're kind of moving at the same time. But it's all very mathematical, very programmatic. And then, of course, we can change these fills to whatever we want them to be. All right, now wrapping this section up, let's add our properties to the essential graphics panel. And see, I'm going to add my animation, gradient start, gradient color, and then activate my essential graphics. And then I have a shortcut set, but I'm going to add, see, my animation property, my fill, gradient start, gradient end. Okay, now that we set up our modular element with its colors and the essential graphics panel, let's set this up in the final composition where we're going to distribute things in 3D space. Okay, here's our intro tunnel. Actually, let's check our final tunnel real quick. As you can see, as we're scrolling through and we're opening things up, the door or like the window or the tunnel, whatever, like it's still closed. But as we're moving closer, it kind of starts to open and we're going to see the other one closed. So we want to be able to control that. That's why we set up the essential graphics panel that way, so we could really keyframe that ability to open. And they're kind of like, I guess, they're a little bit eased. They're nothing too crazy, nothing too snappy, a little bit more linear, but it's very smooth, very flowy. And so we wanted all the control we had over that. Now you can see there's some opacity. There might be a little bit of scale, and there, of course, there's rotation as well. I'm not going to show too much of the rotation here, but more so just how I distribute it in 3D space. And if we ever needed to add more elements, we could. Cool. So let's go back into our intro tunnel. So we have our camera rig here. It's just a basic 50mm camera, and I attached to a camera null. And all right, and then on our camera controls, we have our Z offset slider, which we're going to hook up our pre-comps to it. So let's add our pre-comp to the composition real quick. I have it selected. I'm going to hit Command / and awesome. So we have it here in the composition. Make sure to turn our 3D on and collapse transformation. So this way, whenever we are zooming in and out, we have the matte is active. Okay, before we get too far, let me rename this element tunnel shape to element tunnel shape 0. And this is going to really automate and speed up our distributing process in 3D space. So I'm going to bring up my Z position real quick, activate the expression. I'm going to say const Z offset, and I need to link up to our Z offset slider here. Great. Okay, now we're set up. And so that 0, why did I put that 0 there? So a lot of times what I like to do is when I have a lot of shapes that need to be offset like by a specific amount, I don't like to use the index expression that much because we have other layers here and it gets kind of complicated in some of these systems. So what I do here is I like to use the split method. It's some JavaScript, it's a string method. So it really helps us, it's really powerful. So essentially, since the way I named our layer here, element dash, tunnel dash, I can separate my layer based on that into an array, and then I can pick that element from the array, turn it into a number, and then multiply that number by the Z offset slider. If you're a little lost, no worries. Let me show you here. So let's see, I'm gonna have my const name split, just a variable I'm coming up with, and name, which is the layer, the name of this layer, and split, it can use that method because it's a string. And then I'm going to split based on the dash. Now, what does this do? It splits everything up into an array. So if I was to throw my name split, and you're not going to see anything here because we're kind of debugging inside here. So we have element, tunnel, shape, 0. So that's in an array, and which is great. So what can we do with an array though? I want that 0, and I want to be able to get that 0, or when it goes to when it enumerates in After Effects to 1, to 2, to 3, to whatever, as it keeps going up, I want to be able to access that number at all times without having to change my code constantly or at all. So I'll just say, I need to get that last number. So I'm going to say const last, and I'm going to use the name split, and I'm going to use the, so this is accessing the whole array. I'm going to use the slice method. So this is an array method. It's also a string method too, but we're using an array in this instance. And I want to slice, and I want to get -1. So essentially, this is going to get the last element of that array, and it's going to return it in a value. And let's see, I also need to parse int. And so this is actually going to just do some double checking to make sure I'm going to take that string, what it was before, that type, and I'm going to convert that into a number, because that's what we need at the end of the day. And great, that's really all we need. So now I can go to say my, actually I need to say, put this in a final variable, that's final Z, and say value. So this way, if we want to manually adjust this at all, just to taste, we can. We have that flexibility built in. And let's see, my last, I'm going to multiply that by the Z offset. Great. And then let's return our final Z variable. Right, so this is at 0, which is okay because that's 0 times 300. So now what if I duplicate this? For some reason, After Effects doesn't make this into 1, but here we go. All right, you can't see this now because we're all zoomed in. As you can see, we're at 300. And then say if I was to duplicate this layer again, we're at 600. And now we are at 900. Cool, but now we can't see it. Of course, here, let me go to my custom view just to see it real quick. Now we have all these layers here, and I can adjust my offset. And I'm just holding shift just to speed up the process, but this is great. This is exactly what we want. Cool. And so if we keep on adding more and more things, they would get sequentially pushed back. So just real quick here, I'm going to speed up this process real quick, but I'm just going to change these colors just so you don't have to watch me do this manually. Okay, so now that we have all of our colors changed, and of course the colors are just gross and everything, but this is more just for demonstration purposes. So here, let's go back to our active camera view, and we are all zoomed in like crazy. I'm going to set some quick keyframes for the Z position on the camera, and let's just set this to, I don't know, maybe just 4 seconds. And I'm going to be zooming through these. And of course, we can't see much at the moment because we're already past the animation. So let's set this up to maybe 1,000, and I'm going to set the Z offset to, I don't know, maybe 600, and we can always play with things as well. And let's change this animation to, I don't know, maybe 2 seconds. I just moved it forward in time. It's kind of like a big mess at the moment, but that's okay. Let me get my camera null, and I'm going to grab both of these. And let me zoom in just so we're all zoomed in there. Now, the reason that we have, I need to reverse these direction real quick so we can see appropriately. Cool. I'm going to bring up my position here. Oh, not my position, sorry. I'm going to bring up my keyframes by hitting the U key. And so this is our animation. So everything is going to be opening at the same time. And we don't want that. We want to be able to choose. So that's why we put these in the essential graphics panel. And so I'm going to move these down a little bit, but they have to be visible at the time of when the window's open. And so that's why we made the comps a little bit longer this time around. And let's see here. I'm just going to do some playback real quick. As you can see, when we open, the window isn't like open yet and the one behind it. And then I can always move that up a little bit and move this one up a little bit too. And let's just see how that goes. But as you can see, cool, we're opening, and then we don't see, I don't think we see any negative space, which is great. And then that's opening as well. And then of course, we can always just add some quick Z rotation just to get the idea across that we were rotating like before, add some interest. Cool. Okay. And now we have like an okay like animation here. It's all linear keyframes, but this is really just getting the idea across of how you can build these modular elements, change the color, and also when you're building the modular elements themselves, we can really build these systems for ourselves and be very exact. Use math, use JavaScript. It's not that scary, but we can, if you know it, you can really leverage it to be very powerful, which is really great. It all led to creating this cool tunnel piece in the end.